Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Mike. I'm part of the team at ABN introducing the cloud native strategy. And as Janet says, today we're going to show off a little bit of the work we've done, talk about some of the business decisions we made which led us here, and show how we're using OPA for compliance as code. And finally, share a few of the lessons we've learned in this journey.
Hi, and I'm Laura. Already mentioned, I'm product owner of team at ABN AMRO. And before we start talking about our journey towards containers, I first would like to show you some figures, so you have an understanding of what we are dealing with. So ABN AMRO Bank is active in the financial sector, and that's highly regulated, but also highly competitive. So that means, as a bank, we need to find a balance between delivering software fast, but also in a compliant and secure way. We have around 20,000 employees, 400 plus development teams, and those development teams are either creating or maintaining applications. And if I say applications, we are running around 3,000 applications within the bank. We all do this according to agile principles, and some time ago we started implementing DevOps. Also started our journey towards CI/CD, and we also are following a hybrid cloud strategy. So we're using AWS, Azure, but we also have applications running on-prem. So I hope that gives you a little picture of what we as a bank, what challenges we are facing. So now our journey. So what we've seen in the market is that people started using containers. So we started investigating that as well, and think of the benefits that will be there for us as a bank. So I'll share some of the reasons with you. First of them was increased development speed. So spinning up a container is way more faster than spinning up virtual machines. Besides that, it also gives our developers flexibility. So that means that a container, you should be able to run it anywhere, if it should be on Azure or on AWS. It gives them flexibility. But also us as a company gives us flexibility because we are less dependent on our cloud providers, because we can move. It's portable. Then a unified environment. And with this I mean the challenge that the developer can face when you are creating your software locally. Then you want to deploy it to the next environment, test or acceptance, and it fails because of inconsistencies between the environments. Well, you all know with the portability of the containers, it should run the same on every environment. Then from a strategic point of view, it is also cost efficient because containers are cheaper than virtual machines. And an external influence is that our suppliers, they deliver software, and we see more and more happening that they deliver their software into containers to us. So the next thing that we've seen is that our first team started using containers, and that's pretty cool. So they started experimenting, and after some point they started facing challenges. Because we are a bank, so we have a lot of responsibility. So what is actually secure, and what are best practices? And besides that, if you look at the cloud-native landscape, you see there are a lot of options. So what do you need to choose? And you can imagine that if you have 300 teams within 400 teams that all want to use containers, at a certain point, if they will all select their own tools, you will end up with multiple licenses. So there we thought, we need to come up with clear guidance. So we don't want to restrict our developers, but we give them some guidelines so they can experiment between those boundaries. Also, we want to give them features that they can consume easily. So we don't want to give them all extra work. We want them to focus on their applications, and that we take the rest, that we will take care of the containers and Kubernetes part. We want a uniform way of working, because we are an enterprise. So that means that if there's no uniform way of working and everyone starts doing their own thing, you won't be able to control what's happening. And then last, but certainly not least, we want the teams to share their knowledge. So when a team already started using containers some time ago, they have a lot of experience. It would be a shame if they would not share it with new teams, because then they will have to reinvent the wheel again. So therefore we say share knowledge and your best practices. So in order to do that, we have created a team. With a mission. And this team is called Stratus. And if you actually look up Stratus definition on Wikipedia or Google, you'll see the following definition. It's low-level cloud, and it's a metaphor for our team, because we closely collaborate with the development teams, so we're lowly above the development teams. And also, again, that uniform base that we think is really important. Well, as already mentioned, Stratus really needed a mission because we need direction and also communicate this direction towards the whole and towards all the development teams. And my colleague Mike will tell us more about this whole mission.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura. Okay, so we have 4 main goals within the Stratus team. The first is to provide easy-to-use platforms. Kubernetes is fairly easy to use, but with the bank we have some extra requirements, so we need security, compliance, and things built in. So that is our definition of easy to use. Security is a super important thing. A common mantra in the startup world is move fast and break things, but in the banking industry, if you move fast and break the wrong thing, your boss's 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 boss ends up in front of a government regulator having to explain why that thing broke, and that's really something we want to avoid. Portability across clouds is important for a couple of reasons, primarily strategic. We love AWS, we love Azure, but if you weld your containerization strategy into one cloud provider with no route to extricate yourself in the future, it's not a smart strategic decision. Reusable software components is actually my favorite part. I could spend the whole talk talking about this one little section. This is the mantra of the Stratus team. So if you ask 400 development teams to design a wheel, you will end up with 400 slightly different shaped wheels. Some of these will be triangles. So this is something we really want to avoid. So we provide Lego for DevOps teams to accelerate their application delivery. So for example, we have Infra's code modules for deploying Kubernetes clusters. We have reusable pipeline modules for building containers, delivering them to Kubernetes clusters. And we have Helm charts for common components, such as EFS for persistent storage, ALB ingress, and so on. One of the services we want to offer the teams is compliant by default. So all of our modules are built according to our internal compliance rules. This means if a developer takes our modules off the shelf and uses them with a sensible default configuration, their infrastructure will be compliant by default. Of course, the application still has to go through the review process, but having all of these homogeneous modules in place means a lot of the work is already done. So, as Laura says, we have 400 development teams, so if we can regularly achieve even 1% efficiency gains in a cumulative fashion, this makes the return on investment for the Stratus team very compelling. So to take a look at how compliance and governance rules are built into the platform, we realize in a large enterprise, the tooling is only actually kind of a small part of the equation. Most of the challenges come in fitting it into the organizational structure. So within ABN, we have some platform teams who specialize separately in AWS and Azure. These teams have a lot of expertise in their respective areas, so if we're not working very closely with them, then we run the risk of reinventing wheels ourselves. To take a little bit closer look at the stack, this is what our stack looks like at the moment. It's obviously a work in progress. Continuous improvement is the name of the game here. In terms of pizza as a service, we didn't want the 3-course set menu, but we also didn't want to sit at home baking dough. So we took this middle ground approach where we took the best-in-class tools on an a la carte basis. So you see we're using AWS EKS and Azure AKS. This is because we very quickly decided we wanted to use Kubernetes, but if these cloud providers can give us a managed Kubernetes service, which is certified compliant, then our team doesn't need to become experts in managing etcd clusters, which is, lets us deliver a lot faster. So I'm going to do a very brief run through. I'm sure this is going to be familiar to everybody here. We're using Helm for package management. We got a bit ahead of the curve, and we've already stripped out Tiller. I do not want Tiller in my Kubernetes clusters. So our CI/CD servers run Helm in Tillerless mode. We have not yet selected a tool for persistent storage, but we know that we'll be selecting something that follows the CSI standard. We're currently using Sonatype Nexus for our Docker image registry. This is something that we already had in place, so building on top of that means we didn't need to go through the procurement process of selecting and implementing a new Docker registry. In the security area, we have Twistlock for build and runtime scanning of our containers. Colleagues Dominic and Viba gave an interesting talk in a Twistlock session on Monday, so check that out on YouTube. We're using Vault for provisioning secrets in conjunction with the cloud provider secrets management tooling. And we're using OPA in our pipelines and in our cluster to enforce our compliance rules. ABN already had a mature Splunk infrastructure, so we decided to just send a lot of our cluster data to Splunk so we can reuse the compliance dashboards. Now going to dive in and just take a little look at one of our example pipelines. So again, I'm sure this will be familiar. This is a standard application pipeline that is used within the bank, not just for Dockerized applications, but just a generic application pipeline. We are looking at the Java version, but we also have Python and other languages as well. The second pipeline, this is our Docker-specific pipeline, where we're actually building an image and running through security checks with Twistlock. So at this point, we're doing the image vulnerability scanning. And in the previous step, we're looking more like for vulnerabilities in dependent packages and so on. The final part of the pipeline is the cloud delivery part. This takes the Docker artifact that we built. It runs your Helm chart and your desired Kubernetes resources through our OPA policy checks. And if everything passes, it gets delivered to the cluster. So putting all of this together, we essentially have three pipelines where the output of one is the input to another. And this is a good example of our Lego for DevOps approach. So if you're using Python, you can simply swap out the first part of the pipeline and use the Python version. And if, in the example here, we're deploying to EKS, but if you're deploying to AKS on Azure, swap out the last part of the pipeline. And if other container runtimes start to really gain popularity on Docker, then we swap out step 2, and developers don't really need to think about the actual container runtime. They don't need to worry about the pipeline so much. Everything is sort of plug and play. And finally, if an application needs to be moved from one cloud to another, the developer just needs to swap out the last part of the pipeline, obviously assuming their app is truly portable, which most aren't. Now take a very quick look at what we do with OPA. So full disclosure, we have not finished building all of this yet. This is the vision of where I want to get us to rather than where we are today. So everyone's familiar with infrastructure as code, I think. OPA lets us do compliance as code. So we get all the benefits of the software development workflows we know and love, pair programming, pull requests, code review, but for our compliance rules. So these are things that we, as developers and engineers, tend to take for granted and view as the obvious way of doing things. But these methodologies have not always been readily available to our colleagues in the compliance teams. But now we can use GitOps in our compliance management, which is pretty cool. We use semantic versioning for our policies, so we can instantly see which policy version is applied to a Kubernetes cluster. When a new policy version is released, we can see who's updated and who hasn't. Because we have changelogs for differences in policies, we can see how aggressive we need to be in pushing people to upgrade. And all of this gets fed back into the compliance dashboards I mentioned, so we have full visibility over the compliance state of clusters and applications. Now, if a pipeline fails due to non-compliance, we can give the developer detailed contextual information about the issue and how to fix it. So one thing we check, for example, is within ABN, internet-facing load balancers are not allowed. Everything needs to go through our private network. So if a developer attempts to create a public-facing load balancer in their Terraform module, they'll get an error, something like AWS 02, internet-facing load balancers are not permitted. AWS 02 is a named compliance rule, so the dev can go and look that up in Confluence, see why the rule is in place, and how to move forward in a compliant way. This fast feedback and rich information minimizes the compliance overhead, or at least the frustrations felt by the developers. If developers run into an opaque brick wall that just says, no, 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 not allowed, they get frustrated. So by giving this early feedback, we can reduce, hopefully even remove this frustration. There are two rules in the world of internet dating. Number one is be attractive, and number two is don't be unattractive. And our approach to compliance is similar. We make it very easy for developers to be compliant, and we make it very, very, very hard to be non-compliant. We still have quite a way to go before we get there, but this is where I want to get to with our compliance as code implementation. I'm going to hand back over to Laura so she can talk a little bit about where we're going to next.
Thank you, Mike. So I want to share a little bit about the roadmap. So I already told you about the Stratus team that was created. So that was about like 6 months ago. And what we have agreed upon there is that everything we're going to do it in a lean fashion. So that means we're going to work with iterations, so we can fail fast, collaborate closely with the customers, and really deliver value. And then we started moving forward. We really started creating some prototypes, experimenting, and then in Q1, end of Q1, we delivered our first MVP, which was EKS, completely according to rules of ABN AMRO Bank and regulations for our developers. And we onboarded the first 3 workloads. So our next step and our next goal is to onboard more teams and improve what we have now. Also, the compliance as code we will extend. So it's really working in iterations and start to extend everything. So I'm actually quite proud that in such a short time, in a highly regulated sector, we have achieved so much already. But it's also, of course, because of the offerings of CNCF. Now an interesting part, I want to share some lessons learned with you. First one is to keep focus. So we said we really need to keep focus on the MVP because it's such a fast-changing landscape. New tools are popping up, new regulations, everything is popping up. And if you don't keep focus, you will not deliver that MVP. Then follow a holistic approach. So technique is one thing, for example, Kubernetes, but that's actually not the hardest part in an enterprise. You really need to take care of your governance. So a big enterprise, you will have a lot of teams and departments responsible for security, for compliance, but you also have your cloud provider departments, and there you will need to collaborate. And you need to define the responsibilities to make sure there are no gaps there. Then we think of platform capabilities over just selecting tooling. So what we mean here is that we closely collaborate with the development teams, and there we see what they actually need. So they show us and they tell us what tooling would be best for them, what capabilities, and then we will select the tooling that will fit best for them. As already mentioned, iterations is very important so we can fail fast and move forward. And last but certainly not least in our case, is to automate things. So automation will help you to prevent mistakes that would have been done manually. But it also helps you to scale up. If you don't automate, you will not be able to scale up. So therefore, we recommend that you start automating as soon as possible, actually when you already start on your MVP. But if you haven't started automation yet, my colleague always says, it's never too late to automate. So with this, I would actually like to wrap up our talk. And thanks CNCF and KubeCon for giving us this opportunity to share our story.
Thank you.